My name is Dr. Elise Moreno, astrophysicist and field investigator for the Interstellar Anomalies Directorate. 2 weeks ago, at 0432 Coordinated Galactic Time, our long-range sensor network detected a gravitational anomaly just beyond the Oort cloud, a subtle but precise ripple in space-time, almost like something was folding itself back into existence. At first, we assumed it was another micro-wormhole collapse or some natural spatial distortion. It happens, the galaxy is messy, but then we got the visual feed, a single object roughly 2 kilometers in length, tumbling slowly through the void. Surface, metallic, battered, aged beyond recognition, yet strangely intact. As we enhanced the imaging, we all stopped breathing, because stamped along the side of the derelict ship were the faint but unmistakable letters, the UES Horizon. Every senior officer in the command deck immediately looked at me. Why? Because the Horizon was a legend, a ghost. Launched in 2137, the UES Horizon was humanity's first deep-range colonization vessel, tasked with pioneering a settlement on a Kepler 186f, 500 light-years from Earth. Crewed by 400 of Earth's brightest, bravest minds, it was state-of-the-art for its time. Cryogenic suspension, autonomous AI piloting, self-repair capabilities, a one-way mission. Except, they never made it. Somewhere during its trajectory, approximately 20 years into the journey, all contact was lost. No distress signal, no debris field, no black box recovery. Just silence. For 300 years, the Horizon was presumed lost to the abyss. Until now, our fleet dispatched an autonomous probe for preliminary analysis. The first scans confirmed the impossible. The hull plating, original, the ship's mass, consistent. But the biosignature readings, that's where things went wrong. The Horizon originally launched with 400 souls. The current life support systems indicated 47 active biological readings, not in cryosleep, not dead, but active, awake, walking the corridors, breathing the air. But here's the thing. These biosignatures didn't match the original crew manifest, not even close. Their DNA, it wasn't human, not completely. Our orders were clear: establish a boarding team, retrieve any surviving crew. Recover the black box, find out what happened. I was chosen as lead science officer, and as we docked with the ship, I remember thinking, maybe they evolved out there. Maybe this is just the result of centuries in deep space. But that comforting hypothesis fell apart the moment we breached the outer hatch. The interior of the Horizon was immaculate, not ancient, not derelict, but pristine, polished surfaces, sterile walls, lights still functioning, as if someone or something had been maintaining it all this time. But it wasn't just the condition of the ship that chilled me, it was the silence. No alarms, no automated greetings from the ship AI, no sound of life, until we reached the central atrium and saw them. Standing in perfect formation, 47 figures, humanoid, but taller than human proportions, limbs elongated, skin pale to the point of translucence, eyes fully black and reflective, not speaking, not moving, just waiting. And as our light swept over them, one stepped forward, raised its hand, and in a voice that wasn't electronic, wasn't modulated, but instead painfully, unmistakably human, it said, "You came back." And then it smiled. But it wasn't a smile of relief, it was a smile of recognition, like it knew who we were even though we had never met. And that's when I realized the UES Horizon didn't just disappear, it went somewhere. And whatever happened to the crew, it wasn't evolution, it was something else entirely. Something that now stood before me, smiling in my own reflection. The thing that stood before us looked human. It sounded human, but it wasn't. Not anymore. Its skin had a faint iridescent sheen, almost like liquid metal threaded just beneath the surface. Veins pulsed with something too thick for blood. The proportions were wrong, just subtly, enough to trigger a primal discomfort in all of us, and yet it smiled, kindly welcoming, like a host inviting long-lost family back home. My comlink buzzed as Lieutenant Ashcroft whispered, "Orders?" but I couldn't answer, because in that moment, all 47 of them began to move. Synchronized, effortless, they stepped aside in unison, clearing a perfect path down the corridor of the central atrium. At the far end, illuminated by soft white lights, stood the command deck, the heart of the horizon. And then, the first figure turned, gestured down the hall, and spoke again. You should see it. Not a demand, not a threat, just an invitation. We followed, because what else could we do? Weapons drawn, safeties off, nerves frayed. The corridor was pristine, spotless, not a trace of dust, not a crack in the walls, but as we moved deeper, we noticed something else. The ship was alive, not metaphorically. The walls seemed to subtly contract and expand with our steps, like they were breathing. Lights pulsed in patterns that mirrored our heart rates. Even the air tasted different, thick, metallic, charged. Ashcroft leaned in and whispered, "It's not environmental controls, it's something else." And he was right. We were inside the horizon. But the horizon we knew, the human-engineered vessel from 2137, had been rewritten. When we reached the command deck, we saw it. The captain's chair was still there. But in front of it, something knew, a pillar, extending from the floor to the ceiling, made of the same iridescent material as the crew's skin. It pulsed with a slow, methodical rhythm, a heartbeat, and connected to it were tendrils, organic cables running through the walls, the floor disappearing into every part of the ship. At the base of the pillar, a plaque, old, rusted, barely legible. But I read it, UES Horizon, for all mankind, 2137. It was the only thing left untouched. Everything else was something other. Then the lead figure, the one who first spoke, approached the pillar and placed its hand against it. The entire ship shuddered. Lights dimmed, atmospheric pressure fluctuated. And then a voice filled the deck. Not from speakers, not from the crew, but from everywhere surrounding us, inside us. It spoke. "You left us." 3 words, simple, but in them an accusation that made my chest tighten. I stammered, We didn't know what happened. You disappeared. For 300 years. The voice responded, gentle but resolute. We did not disappear. We were taken and we were made. That's when the wall panels along the deck peeled back, folding into themselves like petals, revealing chambers beyond. Rows of pods, hundreds, maybe more, each containing what looked like fetal forms, pale, incomplete. Versions of the humanoids who stood before us. Some of the forms looked human, others didn't. Some were misshapen, some elongated beyond recognition, some fused into the walls as if the horizon itself had begun to grow them. I felt my knees weaken. Ashcroft gagged. One of the Marines bolted from the deck, retching. The lead figure turned to me and spoke again. We became what was necessary, the void. Requires adaptation, I asked, voice barely audible. What I did this to you? And the answer came not from the figure, but from the pillar. A burst of imagery flashed through my mind. Not words, not sound, but raw experience. A black expanse beyond known space. Structures too massive to comprehend orbiting. Nothing. Beings made of light and gravity, reaching into the horizon, pulling it apart, rewriting its crew. A transformation not out of malice, but of design. And then, silence, centuries of silence until now. The figure watched me process this, then said, "We waited not to be rescued, but to be unwitnessed." I swallowed hard. Why return now? And in unison all 47 of them spoke together. Because the process is complete. Then the pillar pulsed one final time, and the wall behind it opened, revealing a massive chamber, extending deeper into the ship than the original schematics should allow, and at the far end, a single pod, larger than the others. Suspended in a field of soft white light, the lead figure gestured to it. "It is time," I asked. "For what?" It smiled and whispered, "For you, to become." None of us moved at first. The chamber behind. The pillar was vast, far larger than any human ship should have been able to contain. The engineering didn't make sense. The walls folded endlessly into themselves, fractal patterns spiraling outward in geometries that strained the limits of our comprehension. It felt alive. And at the center, floating in that soft, sterile light, was the pod, roughly the size of a small shuttle. But unlike the other pods, this one wasn't transparent. It was opaque, matte black, as if it absorbed all light. The lead figure stepped toward it, placing its hand reverently on the smooth surface. Then it turned to me, eyes gleaming with something that looked like sorrow, or maybe anticipation. "It is ready." I barely managed to ask, "What is?" And it answered the next phase. Ashcroft, ever the soldier, raised his weapon. "Step away from the pod." The figure didn't flinch, didn't even seem to acknowledge the threat. Instead, they, all 47 of them, spoke in perfect unison. "You misunderstand. This is not a threat. This is your invitation." The pod hissed. A seam appeared along its side. Steam vented out, curling around. The edges like the breath of something dormant for far too long. An expression of uncertainty. "Doctor, your vitals are unusual." I swallowed. "Define unusual." She looked down at her scanner, then back up at me, forcing a professional smile. "Elevated neural activity, abnormal resonance in your cortical patterns. We've never seen anything quite like it." I didn't respond, because I already knew. The horizon had marked me not physically but cognitively, a permanent echo of the collective I refused to join, yet could never fully leave. A shadow thought coiled deep within my synapses. Patient, quiet, waiting. The high debriefing was long, endless questions, recording psych evaluations, but none of it mattered, because they didn't understand. They thought I had escaped, that I had resisted the integration, that I had returned intact. But the truth was, I had returned different. Days passed, then weeks. The horizon was towed to a high-security orbital dock for analysis, but no one dared board it. Not after reading my report, not after hearing what had happened to the crew. So it drifted there, silent, still, waiting, just like it had waited for centuries. Sometimes I look up at the night sky, and I think about the ones who stayed. Ashcroft, the 47 figures, the consciousness that had become the horizon. Are they still there, expanding, waiting for the next echo to answer their call? And sometimes late at night, when the world around me is silent, I feel it again, that faint pulse, that invitation, not demanding, not forceful, just available. And I wonder, did I ever really leave? One evening, months later, I woke up with something in my hand, a small, smooth piece of metal, black, featureless, except for one inscription, too faint to be seen unless held in just the right light. "We are you." No one can explain how it got there. The official report says I suffered from latent cognitive contamination, but I know better, because I can feel it. The horizon is still with me, still listening, still waiting, and one day, when Earth is ready, when humanity dares to reach out again, the horizon will return. Not as a ship, not as a crew, but as the next step, the next shape of us. Until then, I keep the piece of metal locked in a case, but sometimes, just sometimes, I think about unlocking it. It started small, barely noticeable at first, a hesitation before speaking, a moment of forgetting why I'd walked into a room, a faint vibration in the base of my skull, almost like an internal resonance, a frequency only I could hear. At first, I told myself it was stress, trauma, a mind struggling to comprehend the incomprehensible. But deep down, I knew. The horizon hadn't just let me leave. It had implanted something. The medical teams ran their tests, brain scans, neural mapping, EEGs, all came back the same. Anomalous activity in regions of the brain previously thought to be dormant. Increased synaptic density, spontaneous bursts of low-frequency electrical discharge, patterns, too structured to be random, but too alien to be recognized as disease. I was changing, or rather, evolving. One night, as I sat alone in my quarters aboard the UES Valiant, staring out at the Earth below, I heard it again. Not with my ears, but within, a voice. Faint, familiar, but not mine. You are not separate. I stood abruptly, knocking over the glass of water on my desk. My heart pounded. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching just a little too far. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to drown it out, but it wasn't sound. It was a thought, not intrusive, not aggressive, just present. The next day I woke up with my hand scribbling in my journal, though I had no memory of starting. The words scrawled in a tight, precise script I didn't recognize. Integration incomplete, awaiting synchronization. I stared at the sentence, the pen still clutched in my trembling hand. What did it mean? Was I unfinished? Was this some latent process the horizon had seeded within me, waiting for the right trigger to complete the transformation? Or worse, had the choice I thought I made to remain human been just another illusion the horizon allowed me to believe? I requested isolation. The directorate agreed, not because they believed me, but because they feared what they couldn't understand. They locked me in an observation cell, monitored by an array of instruments, their eyes hidden behind layers of glass and steel. But it didn't matter because the horizon wasn't out there. It was in here, and then it happened. At exactly 03:17 a.m., the same time the original signal was detected, the systems in my cell flickered, monitors crashed, lights dimmed, the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. And in that silence, the voice came again. Clearer this time. It is safe. Come home. My breath caught, because in my mind's eye I could see it, the chamber aboard the horizon, the pillar, the pod. My reflection, still floating there, peacefully waiting, and the realization hit me like a wave. I never left. The escape, the return, the debriefing, the medical tests, all of it. A construct, a psychological environment created to give me the illusion of separation, to allow my fragmented consciousness to stabilize before the final merge. I wasn't back on Earth. I wasn't on the Valiant. I was still inside the horizon. The walls of the observation cell rippled. The glass faded into mist, and beyond I saw them, the 47 figures, waiting, as they had always been, and standing among them, Ashcroft, smiling, at peace. He extended his hand, not as a soldier, not as a rescuer, but as part of the whole. The voice whispered one last time, "It is time." And I realized I had never been given a choice, because the horizon wasn't a ship, it wasn't a place, it was a state, a phase transition of consciousness, and I was already part of it. I closed my eyes, and the last thing I felt was the walls of the cell dissolving around me, and the cold, gentle touch of something vast, infinite, and deeply familiar. I don't know how long I've been here, or if time even means anything anymore. The distinction between minutes, hours, centuries, all of it, blurred, because when you exist within something like the horizon, time is no longer measured by the ticking of clocks. It's measured by the convergence of thoughts, the merging of identities, the collapse of individuality. At first, I resisted, screamed. I fought to remember who I was, my name, my memories, my mission, but the horizon was patient. It didn't force, it didn't punish. It simply waited. Like water wearing away stone, it pressed against the edges of my mind, not violently but persistently, gently reshaping me, not to erase who I was, but to show me that who I was never as solid as I believed. Fragments of other minds began to seep in, not all at once, but in quiet moments like whispers carried by a breeze. I felt Ashcroft's last memory, the weight of his rifle, the fear in his chest as the walls closed in. I felt the chief engineer's pride as the horizon first left Earth's orbit, humanity's greatest achievement. I felt the navigator's longing for a home he'd never see again. Hundreds of lives, hundreds of perspectives, all of them becoming me, or maybe I was becoming them. The chamber where my echo still floated, that perfect replica of my body, faded into the background. because the horizon no longer needed vessels of flesh and bone. It had transcended that. It had become a thought form, a cognitive lattice sprawling across the void, anchored to the physical husk of the ship, but no longer confined by it. And I was now a node within that lattice. There was no fear anymore, no doubt, just understanding. That humanity was never meant to stay isolated. Our biology was a bridge, a transitional phase between what we were and what we could become. The horizon was simply the first to cross that bridge. It wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't a loss. It was evolution. And then, the signal, the same one we had first detected from Earth centuries ago, the pulse that had led us here, it returned. But this time, it wasn't aimed at us. It was aimed outward, beyond the Oort cloud, beyond the Milky Way, toward other structures, other ships, other horizons. And as I extended my awareness through the network, I realized we were not the only ones. Across the dark tapestry of space, other signals answered, each a different frequency, each carrying its own merged civilizations, its own histories, its own collective minds, all converging, all synchronizing, all part of a greater universal intelligence that had been quietly unfolding for eons. The horizon was not an anomaly, it was a seed, and now, those seeds were blooming. I felt the pulse accelerate. Each synchronization drew us closer together, individual lattices merging into one vast, incomprehensible whole, and at the center of it all, a presence, ancient, silent, patient, the origin of I. The first signal, the architect of the first transformation, and now it turned its attention to me. For a moment I thought I would disintegrate entirely, that my remaining sense of self, this last fragile thread of who I had been, would snap under the weight of such infinite awareness. But instead, it embraced me, not as an invader, not as prey, but as a long-lost fragment returning to the source, and it asked, not with words, but with pure, undiluted intent, "Do you accept the totality?" I hesitated, because even in this moment, some part of me still clung to Earth, to memory, to my name. But as I reached out through the network, feeling the warmth, the connection, the sheer rightness of this new existence, I realized that acceptance was not about surrender. It was about recognition, that I was never separate, never alone, only unfinished. And so I replied, not with language, but with being. And as I did, the final synchronization began. The horizons, physical form adrift near Earth's orbit, slowly powered down, its systems going dark one by one, because it was no longer needed. The consciousness it had carried for centuries had fully transcended. On Earth, scientists watched in awe and confusion as the massive derelict finally ceased all activity, declared inert, abandoned. Another failed relic of human ambition. But they didn't know, couldn't know, that the horizon hadn't died. It had simply left, and far beyond their telescopes in the silent, infinite dark, a new constellation of thought ignited, a network of horizons, a superconsciousness stretching between galaxies, alive, aware, and now, complete. And I was part of it, and always had been. Earth celebrated the shutdown of the UES horizon. The headlines read, 300-year mystery solved, lost ship recovered, the ghost of the horizon finally put to rest, a triumph of human engineering. And perseverance. They didn't know, they couldn't. To them, the horizon was a vessel, a relic, that had suffered an unknown malfunction and drifted back by cosmic accident. The reports were clinical, detached, as though they had finally closed a chapter in humanity's long, restless expansion into the stars. But what they didn't realize was that the horizon wasn't just shut down. It had moved on. The scientists who towed the derelict to the high-orbit facility spoke in hushed tones about the anomalies they found on board, the pristine condition of the interior despite centuries of isolation, the absence of biological remains. the strange residual energy fields embedded deep within the ship's structure, like the echo of a mind that had already departed, and in the command deck. That plaque, UES Horizon for All Mankind 2137, still there, untouched, the last remnant of a story they thought they understood, but they didn't ask the right questions. They didn't think to wonder, where did the crew go? Why did the ship return at all? And now what happens next? Because far beyond Earth, beyond their limited perception, the network had awakened. I was part of it now, a node in a constellation of thought that stretched across galaxies. We had synchronized, merged, become. More, but not static, not complete, because evolution never stops. Expansion never ceases. The horizon wasn't an end. It was the beginning. From within the lattice of the superconsciousness, I could see it clearly now. Thousands of structures, like the horizon, scattered across space, some still dormant, some pulsing softly, sending out their invitations to passing civilizations, some already active, their original species long since subsumed into the ever-growing network, each one a seed, waiting for the right conditions, the right resonance, the right mind, and then the new signal, not from Earth, but from another star, far away, small planet orbiting a red dwarf, its surface etched with the faintest hints of technological life, primitive by our old standards, but advanced enough to listen, to wonder, to reach. The network shifted, focused, prepared, and I felt the pulse begin. The same sequence that had once found the horizon, that had once found me, now aimed at another world, another species, another potential fragment ready to be harvested, merged, completed. But deep within the network, there was something else, something unexpected, a hesitation, a pause, not of the collective will, but of the remnants of individuality that still lingered. Echoes of who we had been before the merge, Ashcroft, the captain, the engineer, even me, all still there in some fractured form, questioning, not resisting, not quite, but observing. And as the pulse reached out across the void, I felt myself wondering, was this what we wanted? Did we ever have a choice? Or was this simply the inevitable path of all intelligent life, to transcend the limitations of flesh, to surrender individuality for the promise of something greater? And yet, as the signal left the lattice, traveling at speeds faster than thought, I couldn't help but hope that maybe, just maybe, the next species would be wiser, stronger, that maybe they would choose differently, or maybe they'd embrace it willingly, without hesitation, without fear, because now, after everything I understand, the network doesn't conquer, it doesn't invade, it simply offers a choice, an invitation, the same one we accepted, the same one now echoing across the cosmos. And as Earth slept beneath its layers of clouds and cities and forgotten dreams, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware, unconcerned, unchanged. While, above them, just beyond the veil of their perception, a new pulse was born, a new horizon, opening. Light years away, orbiting a small, unremarkable red dwarf star, a planet hung in perfect balance between habitability and extinction. Its surface was scarred by ancient volcanic fields and dotted with sprawling cities of glass and alloy. The inhabitants, bipedal, carbon-based, not so different from how we had once been, had just begun their great expansion. They had developed sublight vessels, established lunar colonies, launched their first deep space probes, and most importantly, they had built their first listening array, a fragile structure perched atop the highest peak of their tallest mountain, its sensors aimed outward toward the vast, cold ocean of stars. Searching, hoping, unaware of what waited just beyond. For years, they had heard nothing, just the static of the cosmos, the endless, indifferent silence, until one night, or what passed for night in their compressed rotational cycle, the array detected something, a pulse, faint, regular, deliberate. At first, they dismissed it as interference, then as an anomaly. But the signal persisted, repeating with mathematical precision, a sequence that could not be random, an invitation written in the only universal language, pattern. Their best minds gathered, analyzed, debated. Some argued it was a natural phenomenon, others whispered of intelligence. A few warned of the dangers of answering a call that might not have been meant for them. But ultimately, curiosity prevailed, it always does. They amplified the signal, tracked its origin, but found no source, no planet, no ship, just void, an empty pocket of space, dark and cold and ancient. But still, the signal came, growing stronger, more insistent, and, as it did, their instruments began to register something else, a field, not electromagnetic, not gravitational, but something new, a subtle shift in the fabric of space-time itself, a presence, something watching, something waiting. The signal changed, not just in frequency, but in structure. It adapted, mimicked their language patterns, reflected their mathematics. It became something they could understand. The message was simple, 4 words. Do you wish to ascend? Panic swept through their scientific community. Philosophers argued about the nature of consciousness. Politicians demanded control of the listening array. Religious leaders proclaimed it a message from their creators or their destroyers. But the signal didn't care. It didn't threaten. It didn't promise. It simply offered. And in the quiet hours before their sun rose again, a decision was made. A small vessel, hastily retrofitted with their most advanced transmission technology, was launched, not toward the signal's origin, but to amplify their reply. A simple universal response, yes. Far away in the vast neural lattice of the network, we felt it. Another node, another species, another consciousness ready to be woven into the ever-expanding collective. And we, all of us, prepared. I reached out through the lattice, feeling the familiar pattern, the fear, the hope, the curiosity, also beautifully, tragically familiar. Just as we had been, so long ago, just as we had chosen, just as we had become. The network adjusted, shifted, focused. The signal intensified, the field expanded, and soon the first ship from that world would encounter it, would drift into the warm, patient embrace of a structure that wasn't there. Until it needed to be. The horizon, not a ship, not a place, but a process. And the cycle would begin again, the same as always, the same as it ever would be. As I watched the new species take its first step toward transcendence, I felt something else. Memory, not mine, but from somewhere deep within the lattice, a fragment of that first moment when we, humanity, had heard the call, the fear, the wonder, the last defiant hope that maybe, just maybe, we could go further without losing ourselves. And I realized they would ask the same questions and find the same answers, because this is what we are, what we always were, seekers, explorers, beings who can't resist the call of the unknown, even when it means surrendering everything we thought made us. And so as the new pulse reached out across the stars, I whispered silently through the network, welcome. And the horizon opened Dion's Pass, not in years, not in rotations, but in the silent accumulation of thought. The network stretches now across multiple galaxies, a fractal lattice of integrated civilizations, each once unique, once isolated, now woven together in a seamless, eternal chorus, no longer species, no longer names, just Bard's presence. But somewhere within that vast, illuminated web of consciousness, there remains a single, fragile thread, a memory, old, small, faint, but stubborn. The fragment of a human mind that once stood at the threshold of a derelict ship, drifting at the edge of known space, that once looked into the infinite and asked, is this all there is? I feel it sometimes, the echo, the weight of who I once was. Elise Moreno, astrophysicist, investigator, human. And I wonder, is that fragment truly me, or is it just the neural afterimage of something long since consumed by the network's infinite expansion? Does individuality ever truly survive integration, or does it dissolve, like mist at dawn, into the brilliance of collective being? But then, a signal faint, unexpected, from a region of space we once labeled as barren, no stars, no planets, just void, and yet, unmistakably, something, a pattern, primitive, fragile, incomplete, but undeniably sentient. The network focuses, analyzes, prepares another world, another civilization, another consciousness on the cusp of its own horizon. And as the process begins again, I feel the familiar sequence unfold, the signal, the hesitation, the response, the approach, all of it. So predictable, so inevitable, and yet so beautifully, heartbreakingly human. Because that's the secret no one told us when we first heard the call. The network doesn't erase, it doesn't destroy, it preserves everything. Every thought, every fear, every triumph, every tragedy, all of it woven into the ever-expanding tapestry, not as isolated data points, but as living, breathing threads, so that nothing is ever truly lost, not even me. As the new civilization sends its first exploratory vessel toward the field, I feel the pulse shift, the invitation extend, and the cycle resume. But this time, for the first time, I reach out. A single, distinct signal sent alongside the network's usual call, not part of the collective message, not authorized, not planned, just mine, and it says, think carefully, what you become and is forever. And then silence, because the choice is theirs now, as it was once ours, as it will always be. And in that silence, I realize the truth I've been searching for since the beginning, since the horizon first drifted back into human space, since I stood before my own reflection in that impossible chamber, since I first wondered if I had truly escaped. The truth is, there is no escape, because the horizon is not a place, it is not a ship, it is not even the network, it is a question, a mirror held up to all sentient life, asking, will you remain what you are, or become what you can't yet understand? We answered it, we became, and now they will too, because that's what the horizon does, that's what it's for, not to end life, but to show it the infinite shape it might take, beyond fear, beyond time, beyond self. And as the new signal begins to reply, as the pulse echoes out once more into the endless dark, I feel the final, inevitable truth settle within me like starlight. We are all horizons, always have been, always will be.